shortly. Melissa? Okay, Melissa? Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay, well, thank you. I think we're all ready to go now. So I'd like to welcome you all to the special meeting of Toowoomba Regional Council. This meeting is open to the public and will also be live streamed. I'd like to thank those of you who are in the room with us today and acknowledge everyone watching via Council's social media channels. I would remind councillors to click Join Meeting in Resolve. I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Gayabul and Jarrawa peoples, and pay respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, for they hold the knowledge, rich traditions and bold ambitions of Australia's First Peoples. There are no apologies other than Councillor Carol Taylor, who is on leave, as I understand it. Sorry, it's called leave, I think, yeah. There is no point in seeking leaves of absence. No resolution is required. There's no declaration of prescribed conflicts of interest, and there will be a discussion from Councillor Bill in relation to a possible declaration of conflict of interest. Is that right, Councillor Bill? If you'd like to raise that now.
Yes, Councillor Kerrier, I floated this with councillors the other day, but as a matter of course in a statutory forum, I just wish to raise this again as a procedure. I informed the meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in this matter as defined in section 150 EN of the Local Government Act 2009. The nature of my interest is as follows. This declarable conflict of interest arises because a person who is a related party of mine doesn't have an interest in the matter, is located in the vicinity of the Wendy, that line up there, related party who has an interest, that the related party doesn't have an interest in the matter. Declarable conflict arises. While you're doing that, whoops. The particulars, a related party of mine resides near the site of the development application. I wish to participate in the decision in relation to the matter. I acknowledge that eligible councillors must now determine pursuant to section 150 ES of the Local Government Act 2009 whether I may participate in the decision about the matter, including by voting on the matter, must leave the meeting, including the area set aside for the public, and stay away from the meeting while the eligible councillors discuss and vote on the matter, or may participate in the decision about the matter subject to conditions. So, councillors, over to you.
No, thanks, Councillor Bill. We can just put those three up again. Thank you. We have to determine whether Councillor Bill may participate in the decision about the matter, including by voting on the matter, or must leave the meeting, including any area set aside for the public, or stay away from the meeting while the eligible councillors discuss and vote on the matter, or may participate in the decision about the matter subject to conditions. Are there any questions that councillors would like to ask Councillor Bill in relation to that matter before proceeding further? Mayor?
But potentially, just from a, I don't know, Councillor Carr, we spoke about this the other day, from a mapping perspective, the location of the related party, it says close proximity. Are we talking 100 metres? I don't know, right next door?
No, they're not adjoining. It's just, I'd just ask councillors to respect the location of a family member, a related party, as this is a public forum, and I wouldn't like to air my family members' exact
really just whether
location.
they
But
were-
it's not a,
yeah,
it's not
that's
a,
fine.
an adjoining. They're not an
fine.
adjoining neighbour to this.
that's all-
These lots
that's-
in question.
That's all I needed to get to that point. Councillor, I'm happy that if we go to the motion, that Councillor Bill Carr can stay in the room and participate in the vote, and the reasons being that the related party doesn't have an interest in this development, and therefore removes him from being influenced by that decision, by a decision that could come through.
No, thank you, Mayor. So the motion from the Mayor is that Councillor Bill remain in the council chamber and vote on the matter. I have a seconder to that. Sorry, put the matter in. Well, it has to be seconded at some stage, and we'll go into debate over that issue. Well, if we do, yeah. Councillor Melissa, seconded. So, yes, is it desired that we go into debate? Yes. Councillor Tim. Councillor Mayor.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to reserve my right to speak. If
Okay.
need be.
Against?
Sorry. So, a speaker against? Councillor Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Look, we've already said we'd like to respect related parties and not speak specifics, and I struggle to do that, but I feel like knowing that there is a significant amount of increased traffic on the road that is involved in this. There is a significant amount of amenity changes. I don't consider this and your related party proximity the same as all members of a suburb. I feel like there is a gain or loss because of this development application, and your standard this morning was abundance of caution. I think without that, for me, I would be removing myself from this, and I'm happy with how you decide, but that's where I would be choosing on the side of.
Speaker 4. If there's no further speakers, then the Mayor to respond.
No need for me to say anything further. I think.
Okay.
Thanks.
Put the matter to a vote. Sorry, a question, Bill?
Is it prudent for me to respond? I would have appreciated that as a question. But anyway, I'm happy to, give some clarity around that, but if it's not appropriate, I'll be quiet.
The normal rules of debate was for and against, but so I'll put the motion that the Mayor has moved. Councillor Bill may participate in a decision about the matter at the meeting, including by voting on the matter. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Did you get those, Whitney? Three against, I think. Edwina, Bill, Edwina, Tim. We might have it. Sorry, would you mind indicating those against to raise their hands against? Yes, and, yeah. So the motion is carried. Councillor Bill can remain and vote. The next item is to suspend standing orders so that we can hear presentations from the officers and submitters, etc., and the applicant. So could I ask, Mayor, moves that the standing orders be suspended, seconded Councillor Ponhoff. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. Today we have the Acting General Manager, Jade Bebbington, Kerry Musgrave, Manager of Planning, Elliot Barber, Planning Officer, who will do the main presentation, Luke Jackson, the Senior Environmental Officer, and Matthew Coleman, Principal Planner, in attendance as well. So I'd ask Elliot to present his report. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'll be doing the presentation today. Sorry. Good afternoon, councillors and people in the gallery. I'd like to start by thanking some of the staff members in this room for working some long hours to try and get this to council in such a short time frame. So particularly Wendy Casculli and Elliot, Matthew and Luke for assisting in pulling this together. I'm going to take it that the report has been read. So the following is just a summary of the proposal and the main issues. So the application is located at Reese Road in Highfields, and Wendy, perhaps you could put up the figure A showing the subject site. The application seeks a development permit for reconfiguration of a lot. So 2 lots existing into 46 new residential lots. The site is 28 hectares in area. It's zoned in the low density residential zone, and it's bounded by Reese Road, Cools Road and Barracks Road, which you can see on the figure. The site is vacant and is characterised by open grasslands and scattered natural native trees, and the proposed development is code accessible. Stages 1, 2 and 3 of this estate have already been approved. Stage 1 and 2 contains 49 lots and stage 3 contains 45 lots, and you can see on this aerial photo that the roads associated with same have already been constructed. This proposal is for 46 lots shown in the area that's dashed in red. It sits in the middle of the subject site. The land to the north is proposed to be a balanced lot. The proposed lots, there are 46 in total. They range in size from 731 square metres to 1,149 square metres, with an average lot size of 870 square metres. 2 of the lots are proposed to be identified as future duplex lots or dual occupancy. All of the lots will be connected to reticulated water, sewer, stormwater, electricity and telecommunications. There are some pathways proposed for future connectivity for pedestrians. And even though this subdivision application is only for the 46 lots shown in the middle of the site, a future master plan layout has been provided which shows development going all the way north to Barracks Road. So that is part of our consideration. In terms of the vegetation, clearing and compensatory planting matters, in the planning scheme, parts of this site are mapped within the environmental significance overlay and its buffer. We've also looked at state mapping that shows that the site is classified as containing Category X non-remnant vegetation. So Category X vegetation is not generally regulated by vegetation management laws, and it's colour-coded white on the regulated vegetation mapping. The site contains no mapped koala habitat or mapped native vegetation. The development of the balanced areas of the site will result in the clearing of 199 trees within the environmental significance overlay, plus an additional 25 trees within the buffer. Amongst the trees to be removed, 69 of those are located within the Stage 4 area to which this assessment relates to. Under Schedule 1 of the Planning Regulation 2017, it provides an exemption for the clearing of vegetation on freehold land if the clearing is for an urban purpose in an urban area. There are no provisions in the Toowoomba Region Planning Scheme to require approval for the clearing of vegetation. The applicant could lawfully clear the vegetation on the site without approval at any time. The applicant has proposed to undertake compensatory environmental planting at an offset site location known as Roxana Reserve Highfields, which is on the escarpment. It's approximately 1.5 kilometres from the subject site. This environmental planting aims to mitigate the ecological impacts through replacement of trees at a 3:1 ratio, which is the ratio established in the state government's SEQ koala habitat offset framework. The works proposed will include site preparation, planting, establishment and maintenance for a period of 4 years, and the planting of a minimum 600 native trees. Roxana Reserve is located in a state significant biodiversity corridor, and it adjoins parcels of land mapped as core koala habitat. The proposed revegetation management plan, which is included in the application materials, details the scope and the methodology of the compensatory planting. The revegetation area is proposed to be placed under a vegetation protection covenant under the Land Title Act, and it'll be managed in accordance with a covenant management plan. Council issued an information request on the 1st of May this year, requesting an amended layout to retain vegetation that was contained within the environmental significance overlay. Council also sought further information at this time about the proposed compensatory works. In response, the applicant proposed undertaking the environmental works through the establishment of a minimum of 600 native trees on an external site. The purpose of the Environmental Significance Overlay Code is to avoid or minimise the impacts of development on the biodiversity values of ecosystems, ecological processes, areas of ecological significance and biodiversity corridors. The Environmental Significance Overlay Codes includes provisions under the purpose and the overall outcomes for the provision of an offset consistent with the Queensland Government Environmental Offsets Policy and other applicable biodiversity offset policies. The proposed works do not constitute an environmental offset, however, because an environmental offset may only be provided for impacts to a prescribed environmental matter, which is not the case here. Whilst the proposed development does not avoid or minimise the impacts to vegetation, there are exemptions for clearing remnant vegetation if for an urban purpose in an urban area. It has been determined that the proposed compensatory environmental planting on external land represents an environmental outcome that adequately replaces or makes good the loss of vegetation on the subject land to provide a net benefit. It is recommended that conditions be imposed requiring the completion of the compensatory environmental works and that the applicant enter into the proposed management agreement with Council. I now open this for further questions from Council.
Any questions at this stage? Yes, Councillor Gardner.
Why is it a condition that they got to enter an agreement and plant the trees when it's not law to have to do it? Like,
thank you, Councillor Gardner. Through you, Mr. Chair. The applicant has volunteered to do this as a sign of goodwill to replace and enhance the environmental values of the Highfields community. They do not need to do it.
I'll allow questions after the submitters and the applicants as well, but if you have any further questions at this stage, that's fine. Mayor?
Yeah, thanks very much, and thank you to the team for getting this to us today. Do appreciate it, Carrie and Jade and everyone involved. Elliot, welcome to you. First time up here, is it? Good on you. Can you just explain a little bit further Category X to me? I thought that just might have been a typo in there, but category X, just explain that more, what that means from a vegetation perspective in regard to this application and more applications. It's really an education piece, if we could.
Sure, I might get Jade to respond to that one, and then if there's any further technical questions, we do have Luke in the room who can answer that. Oh, actually, we might just get Luke, go straight to the horse's mouth.
Thank you for the question, through you, Chair. Category X vegetation is a classification of remnant vegetation mapped out by the state under the Vegetation Management Act. That vegetation must meet particular criteria that we can have Category A, Category B, Category C, Category C is regrowth vegetation, or Category X. Specifically speaking to Category X, it's a status of vegetation that has been disturbed below a particular standard by which the state would say this is commensurate with a natural, undisturbed quality of vegetation, from which then the Vegetation Management Act, and then linked in with that, the planning regulation, include provisions about whether or not that vegetation should be protected, retained, or whether it falls underneath an exemption. Broadly speaking, Category X vegetation will have approximately 50% of the canopy removed and 70% of the understory removed. Maybe I've got those round the wrong way, but it's about that level. If your site is mapped as Category X vegetation under the Vegetation Management Act, it means that within Schedule 21 of the planning regulation, it's exempt from requiring approval for clearing, which means purely under the Vegetation Management Act, that site could be cleared based on that particular piece of legislation. If there were other matters under different legislation that required approval, then it would have to jump through those regulatory processes before it was approved. That's to be cleared.
Thanks, Luke. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Bill?
Pardon me, while you're there, Luke, do you have any idea of the latest updates to state vegetation mapping in this area, particularly over these lots? And do we have any record of the last lot of clearing that thinned out this vegetation, potentially downgrading it? Do we have any records of that, or do we have any, are you aware of any updates of state vegetation mapping in recent years in this area?
Not, thank you, Councillor, through you, Chair. Not for the assessment of stage 1, which was completed before I arrived at Council. Are there records available? You can apply through the state to obtain pre-clearing remnant vegetation status, and that will give you a description on regional ecosystem types to tell you what was there beforehand, and that will include some nominal species that are more dominant rather than subdominant species. At the time of stage 1 through to present day, I do not believe there was any change in vegetation status on this particular site. Does Council hold its own records on that? No, it doesn't. Every time, sorry, one last point. Every time a development application comes in and we believe that there could be a state referral requirement, which if this did trigger under the Vegetation Management Act accessible development, then we would advise the applicant, if they weren't already aware, that a referral was required. In doing so, my colleague and I within Council, we check the most current version of those vegetation classifications that the state have mapped.
Yeah, no, I was probably more referring to before any of this, the stages of this development were submitted as an application.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay.
Questions from Councillor Tim, then Councillor Trevor. Councillor Tim?
Well, thanks very much. While you're up there, I thought it would be a great time to ask a question. It's not a criticism of anyone, but if Wendy and your team could take us to figure M under attachment 4, please. It's the last one. I just wondered why, so that shows us the core koala habitat mapping. And I find it fascinating that for this side it ends across the road, and then, well, I'm like, all right, they can't cross the road, but 100 metres to the west they can cross the road in Klein Creek. So it's not a criticism of you, it's not your mapping, but do you have any reasoning why it stops at the road in this site, but just down the road it goes right through?
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Chair. Good question. The core koala habitat mapping, as shown on the screen and throughout the wider area of Toowoomba, is based very much so off regional ecosystem mapping that the state prepares. And the state aren't mapping core koala habitat areas unless they are of remnant status. So when the Mayor asked a question for what's Category X, that's not remnant status.
Right.
The vegetation that's shown under the green highlight up there is considered of remnant status, being good quality. It has a lower, mid, upper story canopy. Its integrity is good, not a lot of disturbance, whereas sites on the image as shown which aren't included have had some form of disturbance for whatever reasons in the past, which meant that that vegetation underneath that overlay is not of good quality. That mapping there is about habitat and habitat protection from a state significant point of view. It's not giving an indication that koalas can or can't move to another habitat tree or a feed tree anywhere else within those regions. It's just about what is currently good habitat, and the state wants to try and give a level of protection to that area.
Yeah, thank you. Good answer. And while I'm asking it, and again, it's not a criticism, it's just request for information. When you have fragmented bits like across the road, then there's a sports field and then there's a bit to the right, just what's the theory behind how they transverse, get into the other sections?
Thank you, Councillor, through your chair. Obviously fauna have the ability to move as well, so the likelihood that an animal, as it's sitting in a tree and it wishes to have some food from one area and then might think, where can I go to find my next bit of food? It might be through a thread, it might be windy or weather, or it might just decide it's time to go somewhere else. Dogs barking. It would need to assess through its own abilities. Do I think I can get from over here safely? If there are individual trees that help them traverse that way, it gives them a refuge point, an escape point, that if they felt a threat was coming, then it could. So, for example, a lot immediately to the north, under the green, and then to the hill area within the council parkland, there are a few trees. Koalas climb any tree at all when they're threatened at all to get away to a safe point, as an example. So they can move but between those areas, and they will find a way to do that if they feel that they need to for whatever reason. Could be territorial reason from one koala fighting another koala out.
Thank you. At present, no further questions.
Thank you. Councillor Trevor?
Thanks, Chair. Tim did ask part of the question that I was going to ask regarding how it just stops at a road. Being an older farmer and fence lines and whatever else, it's amazing what you can do with machinery at some stage of the life, and it changes the whole ecosystem of something with animals. Going to figure H, which is on that thing, which is that one. Ecological significant overlay and buffer. It flows right through there. What's ecological significant overlay and buffer?
Thank you, Councillor, through you, Chair. Ecological significance overlay itself doesn't have a fantastic definition, to be honest with you. When the planning scheme was prepared in 2012, the team that prepared those overlay maps, I was relayed that they were using regional ecosystem information to begin with, and then from that the state collected, regional ecosystem mapping that the state collected, and then refining that to areas that they believed also had other particular values. The planning scheme itself in PO1 environmental significant overlay says areas under that should be avoided or minimised, impacts on those areas there, but it doesn't provide a lot of other definitions to it. The history of where that overlay come from and what it meant environmental significant area, it's given a broad meaning that the area under that is different to all the other areas in that it could have habitat values, it could have species of significance. It's a trigger to ask a developer to provide information back to council about what they've found on site.
Because you go on from that and then you go down to map figure L, development assessment mapping, it just stops again, similar to the koala thing. So it's just really weird.
Yes.
Yes, you agree. Okay, thank you.
I think you mentioned that the previous map provided the opportunity for some evidence of koala presence there. Was that the case here? And if so, what was done about it?
Thank you, Chair. We received a report from the applicant that did a walkthrough of the site, surveyed all of the trees, pinpoint GPS location for every single tree on the site, which is how the Curry before was able to describe the numbers of them. On their walkthrough, they noted that they didn't find any koalas on site during the time of their survey. Officers are aware that there are koala sightings within the surrounding areas. And as I've already noted before, fauna can move from one area to another.
Any further questions at this stage? Councillor Edwin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question following on from Councillor Trevor's. In relation to the TRC ecological overlay, do we know when that was mapped?
2012.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no further questions at this stage, I'll ask the submitter or the representative of the submitters, Mr. Scott McPhee, to come forward, and probably to this microphone. Is that normal? This one? This one. Sorry, Scott, this one over here.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to present to you today. So I just want to give a quick bit of context, then look at the two main objections. First of all, the community objections, and then the environmental objections that we have. So,
if I might just interrupt, Scott,
Yep.
I forgot to mention that your presentation should be limited to 5 minutes.
Yep, that's fine. I've got 5 pages. Just ding a bell if I'm going over. Okay, so 2 years ago, most people will remember the wholesale clearing that happened on Reese Road, which you can see on the left of that triangle there. There was a huge outcry in the community when that happened. I started a petition, probably would have been around August 2 years ago, that received almost 7,000 signatures, and that was presented to council and debated as part of that TLPI motion a couple of years ago. Now, we also had a land clearing forum. Over 160 local residents attended that in December of that year. And essentially, there's a huge amount of community backlash against this development. And the reason for that is that people move to Highfields because of the trees. They like the old part of Highfields and how houses were built in amongst mature trees. And this development, the clearing that's already happened, the proposed next stage, the one further around, which I know is not, I believe that's not part of the applicant's work, but the avenues, people in Highfields basically hate this because it is not the character of the place that they wanted to move there for. And I don't know how they got approved on character grounds, but let's look at the environmental situation now. Okay, so we estimate there's 11.5 hectares of trees that are looking at to be cleared. Now, there's about 7.8 hectares of mature eucalypts, so that's Sydney blue gum, blackbutt, white mahogany, and pink bloodwood. And these trees are about 100 to 200 years old. Now, I know this site was I think it used to be a cattle property beforehand, which explains the lack of scrub underneath those trees, but the trees themselves, it's prime koala foraging and breeding area. There's probably, I believe I heard 199 trees. Our estimate was 150 to 200 are scheduled to be bulldozed. Now, it's not just for the koalas. As mature trees, they're also essential for cavity nesting birds, parrots, cockatoos, owls, kingfishers, owlet nightjars. They all rely on this kind of habitat for breeding. And apart from the timbered areas, there's also about 3.7 hectares which we see as dispersal habitat for koalas. So this allows koalas to move from different forested areas on the ground with very low risk of car strikes or predator attack. And so basically those cleared areas are also very important for koalas as well, not just the trees that they forage and breed in. Now, koalas are declining locally. They're on track to be locally extinct in our area sometime within the next 10 to 20 years. And habitat loss and habitat fragmentation are two of the biggest causes of this. Now, we haven't had access to that site, but I can guarantee that is used by koalas. We've got evidence of koala use in the surrounding bush around there. And essentially, the state koala map is just woefully out of date. It's based on flawed logic as well as being out of date. And the premise that the koalas are going to stop at Barracks Road and not go in is just ridiculous. So I can guarantee that that is prime koala habitat, and you know, it just needs thorough searching if we were given access, or if the applicants were to do long-term searches, they would definitely find evidence of koalas in there. Now, about the offset, that's not equitable because it's almost 2 kilometres away. It's going to take 1 to 2 centuries for the trees to be the same size and offer the same kind of services. And it doesn't replace the usage that you have in this area anyway, because it's in a different area. Now, under the EPBC Act, the significant impact criteria of this federal legislation requires that the developer, if they're proposing an action that's likely to impact the listed species, then these developers have to refer themselves to the federal government. And it's our contention that this has not happened. And this site definitely qualifies as koala habitat and needs to be referred to the Federal Environment Minister for approval. So what we're asking you to do today is get the applicants to resubmit it in a more environmentally sensitive format, but also to get them, well, certainly it would be negligent of this council to approve this development without evidence from the applicant that it has first been approved by the Federal Environment Minister. So that is what I'm asking you to do today, is to delay an approval until the applicants can show that they have got approval from the Federal Minister, and then look at it, and if it's not in an environmentally sensitive way, get them to resubmit it so a lot more of those trees are still there. Old trees and houses do mix. Just walk around Highfields and have a look. Is that 5 minutes?
No, thank you, Scott.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Any questions, or do we ask? Normally allow questions. If they want it. Yeah. I think it's normal practice to allow questions by councillors of the submitter if the submitter is happy to answer any questions, and if there are any questions. Councillor James. Thanks, Scott. If you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Scott. And I just appreciate you coming in and speaking, obviously on short notice with this as well, and appreciate your passion and knowledge around this area. Just explain to me, please, just like when you say if they would resubmit it in an environmentally sensitive way, what does exactly, in your words, what does that look like? What would resubmitting in an environmentally sensitive way look like?
It would be in a way in which more mature trees were retained. We could probably work that off a percentage. Certainly something that would be compliant with the new planning scheme or compliant with the standards that we have in councils around us at the moment. So something that essentially would allow koalas to survive in there whilst there are houses there. And I really want the applicants to realise we're not saying don't develop that, we're just saying develop it in a more koala sensitive way. And bulldozing 199 trees is not that.
Yeah, Councillor
Sorry, so what's that? No trees or 99 trees, or I don't mean a specific number, but I mean, is there like what's the?
Yeah, look, we haven't had access to the site. I can't tell you. We haven't actually specifically logged or defined that model, but I would certainly suggest, you know, a third of the trees retained, if not more.
Any further questions? Councillor Trevor?
Thanks, Scott, for your presentation. With your model of retaining trees, would that be an open space area, or would the trees be incorporated into some of the lots, or how would you do that?
I think you would need both. You would want open space for connectivity between habitats, and I know there's an issue about trees with the proximity to houses, so some would be in yards, some where there's denser areas of trees, I would see them set aside as connective habitat, so a mixture of the two.
Yeah, because if you incorporate it into a block of land, the minute the block of land's bought, easily the tree will go. And it also puts up insurance premiums, so you've basically got to look at, if this was to come to fruition, an open space area, also then trees retained on blocks.
Yeah, I understand that, particularly the insurance angle, but we would hope that a new planning scheme would vouchsafe a lot of those trees from that kind of action by the specific owners of the blocks.
Councillor Bill?
Scott, a question, if I may, to you. As a long-term resident in Highfields, my recollection of this block is very different to what is remaining there. As far as the vegetation stand and the amount of iterations of progressive clearing that's happened there. Is it fair to say, even with the stuff that remains there, if you look to the north, the koala habitat, and Luke has more than capably said that koalas move from one area to another, you see from north to south, and it comes down to Cools Road there, and then you've got that stand of vegetation at the bottom. Even some of that has gone in recent times, but that would be a natural corridor for koalas to venture then into the existing residential areas of Highfields. And I would probably bet you my last dollar that koalas are existing there now. So is it a fair thing to say that, and this is what's been raised about the diminishing value because of progressing iterations of selective clearing that downgrades a corridor, then it gets to the point where it is no longer a reasonable connector?
Yes, that's exactly it. And it's also referred to as the tragedy of the commons, where everyone has a private slice of the greater area, and they don't think in terms of the whole and what's going on. They just think in terms of their own little bit, and it's okay if I clear this, it's only 1 acre or whatever. But when you look at the major causes for extinctions, the biggest drivers are invasive species and habitat loss, and in particular, the loss of connectivity between remaining stands of habitat.
It's very, I wish I had a documented trail of how much Highfields has changed in the last 30 odd years.
Yeah, it's incredible, and you talk to anyone who has lived there for that period of time, and that's about the number one concern that they have.
Councillor Gary?
Scott, yesterday we went and looked at where the new trees are being planted, and all I could see, as far as the eye could see, were trees. So my thing is, you can't keep every area of land. This is 11 hectares. We've probably looked over tens of thousands of hectares, and you know, and I think by going to smaller blocks, there's helping your situation, be, you know, less, you're clearing less land because you're fitting more blocks per land, and I just don't think you can keep every block for wildlife. I love trees and I love wildlife, but
Yeah, so the argument then is let's develop sensitively, and just bulldozing the whole lot is not doing it sensitively. I'm sure there's a compromise that can be reached here. And yeah, I mean, humans need homes too. We know there's a housing shortage, and you know, the advantage of small blocks is you get more people into that area, as is the advantage of urban renewal and you know, low level flats and units in town, you know, going up rather than out. All I'm saying here is that the proposal as it's put forward doesn't work for the environment and doesn't work for the community, and there's an alternative. It's going to cost the developer more to do it that way, but we all know that it's a seller's market at the moment. They will be able to sell those blocks if it's done in a more sensitive way, and it will certainly be received more positively, which may reflect the market price if you do it in a more environmentally sensitive way.
yeah, but I think, you know, they'd probably end up losing 60% of their blocks to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't run sewer and water around trees.
Yeah, so look, we understand some trees will have to go, and I would love to be able to talk to the developers about this. I've approached them 3 times. Initially I was told it would be possible. Now I don't even get my emails returned. We're willing to work towards some kind of compromise, the environment community and the developers, but it hasn't happened yet.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Scott, thank you.
Yep.
Hear from the representative of the applicant, Paul Kelly of Precinct Urban Planning. Thank you, Paul.
See how this goes. Through the chair, councillors and members of the public, staff, just thank you for the opportunity of being able to speak today towards this application. I think probably it's helpful to know a bit of the development history of the site and where the developer has come from to get to the point of where they are now. And probably as I do that, it might be helpful for me to sort of pick up on some of the points raised through the chair about the reason for why the vegetation is mapped the way it is through there. So I guess the applicant, JL Proprietary Limited, purchased the property in 2015 and was holding on to that site, but then was put in a position of having to commence development on that land in order to service the avenues development to the east of there that required a route to put in a sewer main that would ultimately connect to the Weir Glen pump station. So the path that was selected through this site was one where they chose the lowest part of the site, and the reason behind that was to try to limit as far as practical any impacts on clearing within Klein Creek. The layout then of the development in order to put the sewer main, which sort of runs parallel or partly parallel to Reese Road, meant that the design resulted in lots fronting Reese Road and lots facing internal roads to the development. Then that first application went in 2017. So at that time, I was doing searches for the state government's mapping. I was aware of the council's overlay mapping, but also was more conscious that the state's mapping had more regulatory power. So at that time, the subject land was only native vegetation then that we looked at. There was no native vegetation on the site, and despite that mapping now, there was no vegetation north of Barracks Road either. So Klein Creek certainly was the vegetation to the east, but the subject land, Barracks Road, was not mapped. So then we, through the course of that application, there was an ecological impact assessment undertaken by Aquila NRM. We submitted that, and as part of that process, what we found on the site was historical aerial photography searches that showed that when the land was a dairy, I think it was, that the land was not only cleared, but also was under cultivation. So over time then, trees have started to grow on the site as it's no longer being used for grazing purposes, or certainly agricultural purposes. And still in 2018, when mapping searches were done that I've got records of then, there was still nothing on the subject land nor the land to the north of the site. By the time 2021 came around, that's when we were looking at doing stage 3 of the development. And the mapping searches that I have at that time showed that there was still nothing mapped on the subject land, but the land to the north of there, north of Barracks Road, was started to be mapped as regulated regrowth. So it had sort of taken up one step up to regulated regrowth, not as mature native vegetation, but regulated regrowth. At that same time is when the state government introduced its koala habitat mapping, and that came in about February 2020. And in order to bring something in quickly, that particular government department used the Native Vegetations Department's mapping to almost mirror those areas. So the subject land was already 2 approvals or 2 stages into being developed by that point. Whether that has an impact on why it was mapped the way it was, whether it's the Category X mapping that Council's planning manager mentioned before, but in any event, development approvals had begun on that site already at that time, and it was just regulated regrowth to the north of the site on Barracks Road. Then, so that was 2017, there was an ecological impact assessment done. Then in 2021, when we were doing stage 3, Council required that original ecological impact assessment to have amendments, and it was then subsequently endorsed in May 22. And then in June 22, the Council then, June 22, the Council then issued approval for stage 3. As part of that stage 3 application, the applicant had to do an addendum to the original ecological impact assessment for that site that reflected the additional areas that were proposed to be cleared under stage 3. And then, as the submitter representative mentioned, there was community concern at the time when the applicant started to develop the approved stage 1 and 2, including Council's requirements to remove mature vegetation within the Reese Road Reserve. And in response to that, even though the applicant knew that they were not obligated to have to seek any formal regulatory approval for the clearing of vegetation, they sat and thought about, well, what can we do before we start doing any further clearing in order to limit the effects of vegetation removal? So when we started with this application, a pre-lodgement meeting for that proposal included a parkland in the middle of the site where it was proposed to retain trees in a central location within the middle of the site. We submitted that to Council for pre-lodgement advice in August of last year. Council then in its minutes responded by saying that Council's Parks and Recreation section believed there's an oversupply of public open space in the Highfields area and did not want more parks in this site. Sorry. And then I guess to finish then, the next proposal that was put as part of that meeting, Council still wanted 15 dwellings per hectare for lots, but was willing to look at larger lots if it meant retention of trees. So a subsequent plan was put to Council showing larger lots with retention of trees, and we did not receive support from Council for that proposal. So the current application has come in with the compensatory environmental works on the Cronin Road site that some councillors saw yesterday, and that's been the applicant's goodwill in moving forward, trying to give something back to the Highfields community, knowing full well that there's no obligation to have to seek approval to clear on that site.
You're happy to answer questions?
Yes,
Paul?
I am. Yes.
Councillor Von Hoff.
Thanks, Chair, through you. Thank you so much for that, Paul. And I have so much respect for you. I think, you know, we've been in this position for almost 5 years now. And over those years, I have come to have that respect for you. So when I sit here and I listen to you, I take in every single word. And until that last 30 seconds, I had questions here on my page about parks and about the retaining of trees. And then comes the sort of bombshells, the 2 bombshells. First of all, that in August 2023, the applicant approached Council and said, and looking at probably, I'm guessing figure D is a good one to have a look at. That, thank you, that there was a submission to council. Could you just roughly on that figure D, Paul, tell us where was the proposed park?
So the park was reasonably central to that area. I'll just see if I can look at lots. Sorry, that was figure D, was it?
Yeah, figure D.
The park was up in the area, 105 in that 112, 13, which is where the clump of trees.
Which is where the clump of trees is. Thank you. Thank you so much for that,
Yes,
Lynn.
that's right. Yep.
And then the second mic drop, in my opinion, Paul, was when you said that council, you had, or the applicant had actually come to council with a plan for larger lots and that this had been refused.
Well, not necessarily refused, we just didn't get any support back with respect to that.
Okay.
Which is why then we still had to move in response to the housing crisis that is happening. And in the interests of just continuing to move forward, it was in April this year, I think, that we lodged the application you had before you, where we went back to the smaller lots that you see there, including the master plan. The larger lots were in a similar area to where Lynn just showed, and they were actually 3 quite large lots right in the centre of that site, trying to pick the area where there was more vegetation than anywhere else on the site. So in not getting a response back from that, we then just changed tact and moved towards the voluntary compensatory environmental works. I just probably would like to mention too, I did mean to, if it's okay through the chair, just in response to questions about the submitter raised in relation to federal referrals, that is not lost on the applicant either. The applicant is aware that those referrals are sometimes required and has now sought 4 distinct environmental assessments across the site with that in mind as to whether or not they should or shouldn't have to refer to the Federal Environment Department about that. So one of those was back at the time when the stage 1 and 2 ecological assessment was done. And I'm sorry, Councillor, I just forgot to mention before, but the other is then in more recent times, there's been an assessment done over 2 days and then a third assessment done at night time. And then for the application this year, a 4th assessment done with the view of trying to determine if there's a trigger to have this referred to the Federal Department.
And the outcome of that, do you know, Paul?
It hasn't indicated that it needs to be done.
Okay.
And that's 3 different consultancies that have done that.
Okay, thank you. So, Chair, if I might just, so if I take us to figure A, the subject site, and I would be surprised if another councillor doesn't raise the same sort of thing. I was looking at that when it was up there, Paul, and on the part of the map, the part of the figure where we've got Reese Road written, they're established blocks and there's trees there. To the right of the Cools Road words, we've got a new development. I believe that's at the Avenues, and there's nothing there. We've got, I know that there's a playground in the middle of that development. But looking at that, it gives you a really good idea, I believe, of the site, and it's not densely vegetated. It's not densely vegetated. And I was sitting here thinking there's got to be a way to advance the development that is done in an environmentally sensitive and design sensitive way, and then you come and say, yes, there is, we tried. So I think there might be other questions, but at the appropriate time, I'd like us to ask the question of council officers, perhaps in the who were guiding this development application. But right now, may I ask through you, Paul, and Lynn, you're here as well, is there a willingness, if there was a willingness on the part of this council, is there a willingness still to revert back to those plans that had been submitted to council, where there is the retention of those trees around lots 105 and potentially also the larger blocks?
Through the chair, it may be appropriate if okay for the applicant to respond. Yeah.
Thanks, Rebecca. The zoning of this land isn't for larger blocks for a start. So in the land across the road in the Crow's Nest days before there was sewer, that was the size of your land, 3,000 square metres. Obviously, it was a little town back then. Toowoomba is growing, we have no land. Highfields is becoming the place to go. So, like anywhere in your planning schemes, you're trying to get density. So the same thing's happening out here. If we just keep spreading out, your infrastructure costs are enormous. You won't get there. We put 3 blocks in because we were at wit's end what to do. Nobody's going to keep those trees. So in the end, the big picture is we've got 3 blocks that could have been sewered. We've lost 3 blocks in every 3, so 9 blocks revert to 3. And what's the end picture? Exactly the same. So we looked at it with the ecological significance overlay. We understand trees. I love gardens. I understand trees. I understand the emotion behind it. But when you look at this zoning, it's 15 houses per hectare, which is probably about 700 square metres. If we look at the avenues, they're 600 square metre blocks. Ours are up to 900. Ours will have a 3-bay shed in the backyard. People say, well, they don't have, they can't have that. But we all have a choice of what we have and where we live. We don't say to you, you can't have that. People who have, all your tradies that build Toowoomba, your tradies, your builders, people with a boat, people with a caravan, they can't live on 600 square metres in this city because they cannot house their ram utes and everything else. They're all over the streets. We provide that size, and out there you'll find every house would be at least 270 square metres and it'll have a 2 to 3 bay shed in the back. And to retain a tree on that, you would have to have a perfect tree sitting in a perfect spot, and they'll probably take it down because they say that it's going to hit the roof, or, trees create fire, requirements under bushfire zones. You have, you've got problems with pea soils. We all build on flat pads now. Very few stump homes are ever built, particularly now with the energy rating that's come in. They're the worst house. So, they're the most expensive house to build because very few builders would build a stump home these days. It's concrete on ground. So, but I just wanted to say if we've got 125 blocks left, which is what we've got in stages 4, 5 and 6, if we make them 2,700, which Will from Range will tell you that's not big enough to have trees around, so let's make them 4,000. We've got 30 blocks. We've gone from 125 blocks to 30 blocks. People can take the trees down. There's nothing going to stop them. And we have a housing crisis, an affordability crisis. Mum and Dad cannot afford a $900,000 block and then put a house on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to round this out, and then I'll pass on, Chair. So thank you for that, Lynn. And I accept what you're saying about the block size, and I think it was Councillor Gardner before who was talking about we need density. So I accept that. Can we go back then, if we park the lot size aspect and keep it as is, can we go back to the proposal from August 2023 and test if there's a willingness to retain as parkland the trees around, if we're looking at figure D, 105, 106, which you were referring to earlier, 105, 106, right up to, I think you mentioned 111. And then for connectivity, it's actually a couple of blocks up as well. Is there still a willingness on your part to, if council is willing, to retain that part for, keep all of the block sizes as is, but just single out that part for the trees to be retained?
I feel you'll find your own parks don't want another park. This area
We decide that. We're the council that decides that.
But they've got to be maintained and there's cost to it. That area has so many parks. You've got the massive sports field, you've got the park at the creek, you've got the park at Wirraglen, you've got the park at the avenues. Have I missed any?
There's one across the road.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, I just don't know. Well, we would have to look at it again. You know, it was declined. We've been down there and it was declined. And I understand why, because there is a lot of maintenance. There's maintenance that, you know, they're probably struggling with now. But, and then in the end, is that creating this corridor that you're wanting, or is it just a thing of keeping 10 trees? You know, it's not that there's koalas being detected on the site anyway, but it's certainly not creating a corridor. Where we're planning to plant, there are koalas, we've had dogs, we've had scats DNA'd, we know how many koalas are on the site.
Cronin Road.
Yeah, at Cronin Road, at Roxana. It's there forever, they're not disturbed. You even create, you know, a park, whatever you do, there's dogs, there's cars, you know, there's swimming pools, there's all these sorts of things which aren't for koalas, but as I say, they're not there. But, you know, we just felt the better idea would be to get the community involved, find an area. It's 102 hectares of trees, this site we're talking about. They will never be disturbed. Clive will never develop this land. It will end up either here or with the state. So it adjoins land that you've already bought. And yeah, you know, I just feel we could involve the community. We can, you know, developers, yeah, do get a bad name, but we are looking for something else. We didn't have to. I actually didn't want the tree. I said, no, we have to do something for the community. We're not just going in there and taking the trees down. So we've worked for months on this to try and find a solution that, you know, I mean, I've got 370 people that obviously want to buy that land and they're not concerned about the trees. So we can't say everybody wants that either. You know, it is a little bit dangerous when you say everybody wants it. That's not actually right. People want to be able to buy a block of land that they can afford. It's close to all those council amenities that you spent money on. There's huge sports parks, you know, libraries, swimming pools, the 2 shopping centres, your dump. All these things are built. If we had this in the city, you'd be saying build 2-storey buildings. You know, we have this at your doorstep on this site. And I think it's silly to start putting park residential blocks in there. You know, thank you.
A couple of other questions. Councillor Trevor?
Okay, thanks for your presentation. Paul, with Councillor Rebecca, I was going along quite well until you let that bombshell out regarding parks have made the decision not to want some open space there. Obviously, for the tone of the message that's been delivered at the moment, you're not sort of going to revisit that? Or would you revisit that? Leaving the lots as they are, but getting a suburb little centre there with an open space area? Or have you moved on from that and are now wanting to plant those 690 trees over on the other block?
Just through the chair, just as a response, this part of Highfields, back when the 2012 planning scheme came in, and I appreciate this is going a bit to the side, but it's following on from what you were asking, was identified as a potential site for a local centre. It occurred just sort of about where the word cools is written there on the subject land. So as part of the first application that we did, we had some discussions with Council's strategic planning section about that. And that local centre now has been relocated to that triangular parcel of land that you see opposite the sports park. So over time, Jet Elders received inquiries about all manner of types of development on that parcel of land, and it is one that is identified to have something that is either as a local centre or something that serves the sports park across the road in proximity to the site. This one, the way the development has worked here, it just made more sense. That was more available land to be able to develop for residential purposes. The triangular parcel then was something that was suited for a local centre because of its location directly opposite the sports park.
And with that triangular piece of land, what do you envisage being there? Just trees? But what I was referring to before was lot 105, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is capturing that as an open space area, retaining trees, and obviously a tree has a life, and also then replanting some other trees, so when that tree has finished its life, you've got new ones coming along.
Yeah, well, we have been there enough, we'd have to, the decision's due today, so it makes it very difficult to start thinking, what we do once engineering started and everything else. And I'm not sure, obviously you're the councillors and you can override what we were told, I guess, but, it would have to be, it'd have to be revisited. The triangle bit of land, by the way, came about because that paddock went right out, and when Clyde bought the land, he was asked to realign Cools Road so that your Kabala Park Road and your Barracks Road were a four-way intersection at your sports park. So it's something we did, just like we took the trunk sewer through so that you didn't have to take down your koala habitat trees at the creek. I mean, we work with you so much, we really do. And yeah, so, and we've tried to work through this too, but we would have to rethink it a bit. As I say, it's very difficult with today being the decision day. So, yeah.
I guess the point is, though, those pre-lodgement minutes I referred to are council documents. So that advice is on council's record that we've then acted on in moving forward with a new design for the site.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, I'll frame it as a question then. Look, I think we just need to be careful around this bombshell moment of this park thing. This happens all the time. With the majority of developments, and for a reason. Whole of life costs, and council has to maintain the asset after that. And it's one of Councillor Carl's comments that the whole of life costs. So I just don't think, we just need to take into account, obviously, that I don't think it's necessary, I 100% know, it's not necessarily our staff that are adverse to open spaces or parks or things like this, but it's a simple reality of, as the applicant even pointed out, with multiple that are there at the moment, it's the ability to maintain it post when it's handed over from the developer. So if there's a different conversation around additional funds being sourced to maintain potential said park, it's probably a different story. But I just think, and Councillor McMahon probably know better than I don't know. I'm not sure off the top of my head how many parks we do have, but I mean, for the maintenance that we have, that's the reason. So I don't think it's necessary. I know it's not a case of staff being, well, no, because we're anti things like this. So I just think that's important because there's a financial implication that comes with this as well.
Yes.
And yeah, when it comes to parks, are we giving you the land or are you paying for the park? Once again, you see, it's 9 blocks of land we're talking about. That's why you can't, like when you say make bigger blocks, if those blocks are 300,000 each, you're 900,000 for your block. But it's a thing of purchasing the land, then, isn't it? So, do you want another park if you've got to purchase it and maintain it? And Jade might be better on that to address that than me. But
yeah, no, that's foreshadowed what was going to happen. Thanks, Jade.
Wendy, would you like to bring up figure J, which is an image from the open space strategy? Highfields is quite well serviced by parkland, and certainly, while I'm not fully aware or across the conversations that you've had in relation to open space, typically the response or the reasoning behind, as Councillor James has said, the reasoning behind why the Parks and Recreation officers would typically say no to a park is because it's not identified through the LGIP process, and there is a process for identifying whether new development triggers additional parkland. And there's thresholds that need to be met in terms of the density and requirement for that. And looking at the number of lots here, I wouldn't think that it's triggering that level of density. So the question then becomes, as has been mentioned by several people now, are we oversupplying, and what are the considerations around the maintenance and burden that then by extension becomes the maintenance and burden for our community? So we can certainly consider the implications and positive implications they are in retention of vegetation, but there also needs to be the realistic implications around maintenance. And they are the things that our officers in Parks and Rec need to consider, and that is what they're asked to consider when they're looking at the parkland. So that's part of it. And then in terms of Lynn's question around offsets, typically if we're looking at this to be a piece of trunk infrastructure, then we would definitely need to be having a conversation around this being a local park, and as such, are we looking at offsets? And that's obviously not a conversation that we've had, and we are at the 11th hour of making a decision.
So through the chair, I was just going to follow on from Jade then. I think we need to go back to what then the applicant has offered. So we've explored this opportunity of a park, we've explored larger lots. That's why they've now looked at environmental or compensatory environmental plantings on a site that does adjoin council's open space in an area that the state and local biodiversity corridor mapping says is where these things should occur, and it is there for the longer term. Council and council staff are not required to maintain it. The applicant is required to maintain these trees for a period of 4 years as a minimum till they reach 4 metres in height and can merrily go along their own way. That's not the end of it. They're then under a vegetation protection covenant where they can't be touched, which is better than what can be achieved when you've got, and I've certainly been involved in them, in the Highfields area, where you have developments of, say, 2,000 to 3,000 square metre lots where council has sought to retain specific trees throughout the estate. The blocks get sold, the trees come down. And it just is an ineffective way of retaining vegetation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you,
And I was
Paul.
going to say, and where the planting's going, one day you may have a very big park to look after.
Sorry,
So
Cass,
that's what will eventually will happen, you know.
did you want to
Yeah.
ask a question, Tim?
Yeah, I will. I haven't yet. Hi, Lynn. Hi, Paul. Yeah, it was going to bring up the open space strategy. Says one of my favourite parks, William Creek, is right next door. Yeah. We have whole of life costs, but this idea of bringing a small park in the middle of suburbia, whether that achieves what we want, which is koala habitat, I don't feel they're going to be able to navigate the plethora of back fences to get to the park and achieve our corridor means. So you're saying, just to be clear, a park won't really do it, and we can't alter the block at 700 squares to retain some of the large trees. Is that?
At the rate of density that is required, and I mean that when you're a developer, you don't go in and say, oh, well, I'm just going to change this density. You work with your rules. You look at your mapping and you look at your densities. Every block this day is cut and filled. Cut and fill means everything's built level. Came in, I think Clive said 50 years ago, someone came to town from Brisbane and you said, what are you doing? And you're saying, this is how we build in Brisbane. It's the cheapest way to build. It's on, a concrete slab, but you have to have a flat block. So if your block's like this, you take this bit off and you make it flat. Yeah. Every single block in the subdivision is flat. which makes it very, very difficult for trees because you've either got the soil up around the trunk or you've exposed the roots. So for a start, every block is benched. Then you've got stormwater, sewer, NBN, electrical, water, curbing, roads, footpaths. These things don't, because your pipe's this big, doesn't mean the hole's that big. The hole's this big, you know. So every pipe has got a trench and every pipe is affected by a tree root. Tree roots are like 1.5 times the height of a tree. So an impact on a road, I mean, you'll see it in your own areas, all your footpaths are hazards. You know, it is not easy. So you get what you can get done, then the houses come along and they have the same restrictions. I think Will was saying you need about 15 metres from a house now to be safe. You know, how are we going to do that on an 800 square metre block, you know, and stay in the density that this area is meant to be, like the avenues, us, Wirraglen, everything in that area is zoned that density. And I understand why, because it's now a growing town where people, since Highfields was a very difficult place to sell. We were one of the first people to ever develop out there. The only way we got them there was build 900 square metre blocks because no one can fit, you know, the ram ute with the trailer or the boat or the caravan. They can't fit them in Toowoomba. So they went out there and it became that sort of area. That's still our market. The avenues are doing 600. Wirraglen's, like you said, they're a mixture. But together, we're creating a community for mum and dad. We're not creating a community for millionaires. It's mum and dad where there's schools and there's shopping centres and there's parks, and it's an absolutely beautiful place. And I agree with Scott and all them. It is a beautiful place. But it is now a growing city because we don't have a lot of land in Toowoomba, and we have to, unless we keep going, we'll all be a crow's nest, you know. And I'm sure you haven't got the money on infrastructure to be taking it out that far. So I think, yes, it's sad to see the old crow's nest Shire days gone and we lose 3,000 square metres. There's still areas of that in Highfields because there's non-sewered areas, and that's the only way you can do it. You have to dispose your sewage on site, so you have to have a big enough area that it's far enough away from your home. All your corridor road areas, we just finished one at Steinberg and Otto. You know, so those areas are still there, but not where you've spent millions of dollars on a pump station. You know, that pump station that goes through our land, it goes across Barracks Road, it goes up, it's on one of Clive's properties, it's actually sewering your sports parks, so it's giving that ability, but that will actually sewer, it actually should sewer all of Roxanne. It sewers all the land on the other side, it's sewering the avenues, it's sewering Wirraglen. So, and that was built by the council. We did a little pump station on Reese Road, and look, it's not much change out of $1 million, so I'm not sure what you spend on a trunk pump station, but I think a fair bit of money has been spent on that too. And so you've got to utilise the sewer. We have to, unfortunately, move ahead. We'd all maybe like to live on 3,000 square metres. Affordability, not possible. So that's about, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn.
Yeah,
thank you, Paul. Yes, Trevor?
Just one further question. Okay, this all goes through. What street trees are going to be planted in that whole subdivision?
The species of street trees?
Are they Australian native plants?
Yep, they're all natives.
Yes.
I'll give you a rundown.
Okay, I just want to get some clarity.
Reese Road's Tuckaroos. As you drive in, we're going to have water houses. We've got ivory curls. I'm trying to think what else we've got. We've got the Elacarpus amundis, we've got the Elacarpus, the blueberry ash, whichever one that is.
What height will some of these trees grow to?
Well, a street tree, they don't want a massive tree.
I know, but I'm just getting a picture.
8 metres? Yeah. So, yeah, so the Reese Road that you see, that's all your Tuckaroos. I'm trying to think where you'd see Tuckaroos. Over at Aldi on, what's that, Hume Street. their tuckaroos are actually, they've gone quite well in our Clinton land. Some trees don't do well, but it's a very, it's not a good gardening soil. I feel it's a very good building soil. It has very little movement, very little clay. So we plant all, and then we've got lily pillies in the front gardens. Trying to think what else is in there. I have got one ginkgo only because I like ginkgos in the roundabout, but it's like you've got on Mackenzie and Stenner, the big tree there, or at Spring and Ramsey. Yeah. So, but we try to do natives. Yeah.
Sorry, and I think too, Councillor, just worthy to mention that the street tree plans require endorsement from council. So the species that we select, council doesn't always accept. So generally we've got to go down the path of picking species that they know they will agree to in the particular environment where we are.
I forgot Barracks Road.
For
Water
general,
gums and
more
brush box.
more for general knowledge of us plus people watching.
Yeah.
No, well, thank you. That seems to exhaust the questions. I'll just thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Paul. Move somebody to reinstate motion reinstating standing orders. Mayor, further question?
Just a quick comment based on the discussion, the questions and the responses. A good case in point, we need to get on with a lot of things. Review of the LGIP and classification of parks and the coverage, and are they appropriate type classifications and are they best used, and the mix of those within that serve the community the best. The need for a TLPI and the amendment of growth fronts accordingly to preserve sensitive vegetation overlays. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
Thank you for your comment, Mayor.
I do have a question, thanks, Chair, if I could, through to Gary or Jade, Elliot. Just in regard to the EPBC Act and the 4 distinct areas that have been worked through, what does that mean as far as this decision today is concerned? Does that mean anything for us?
The EPBC Act is federal legislation that deals with federally significant conservation matters. It is my understanding that there is nothing on this site that triggers any assessment by the EPBC. And Luke, do you want to add anything to that? No, he's saying no.
Thank you. That's right. Happy to move to go back into.
The Mayor moves we go our standing orders. I'm seconded to that. Councillor Verhoef, all in favour? Carried. Thank you. So the item that we're discussing is the reconfiguring of lot code 2 lots into 46 lots located at Reese Road, Highfields, and lot 2 on SP 274504, easement C, D and E, SP 304253. The required motion is that the Council approve application number RAL 2024/1617 for a development application for a development permit for reconfiguring a lot code 2 lots into 46 lots pursuant to the provisions of Section 60 of the Planning Act 2016 and subject to the conditions in Attachment 3. Could I have somebody to move that motion? Mayor and Councillor Gardner. Second it. Any need to go into debate? Yes. Okay. We shall go into debate. Councillor Mayor.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. Firstly, can I thank, as I've had before, the officers for bringing this forward today, and thank you to councillors to bring it in. I think today has been a real benefit for our community. And I thank Scott McPhee, representing the community as well as you do each time. Scott, thank you very much wholeheartedly. I do appreciate that. And thank you very much to Paul and to Lynn, particularly Lynn, for coming in today and representing, as you do, the organisation you have that's done so much good for so long and given people houses. But I think today has really demonstrated the challenge we have as a community at the moment. And we often talk about balancing growth and livability. And today has been a really clear example of the challenges that we have. The application that's before us today is code accessible. It has absolutely no reason for us not to approve it. Absolutely no reason for us to approve it under the current status of where we sit. Zero reasons for us not to approve it. Every question that was asked, every answer that was given, every scenario that was given today reinforced to me that we are today deciding on an application that we have no reason to accept. That's basically where we sit. The generosity of the applicant to do 3-to-1 trees is not lost on all of us, I'm sure, even those that may oppose this motion. Perhaps it's not in the right place or the place that some of the community members might suggest it should be. But perhaps the applicant didn't need to do it in the first place. And under the current regime, under the current planning scheme, under the current rules and regulations, whether it's federal, state or local, this application has no reason for refusal. And therefore, I'm happy to move it.
Councillor Von Hoff.
Thanks very much, Chair, through you. Don't disagree, Mayor. Our hands are, I won't say that they're tied, but I will say that what a position to be in. What a position for us to be in. And it also strikes me as a real lost opportunity because I hear from the submitters and I hear from the applicants, and there's actually so much common ground in what was said. And yet I feel like somehow through this process we've got to an outcome where what is proposed is the removal of every single tree on the block. And we are in a position where we understand that the first step with areas of environmental significance is to avoid removing it. The second step is mitigation. The third, and it's only if the other two are unavoidable, do we go to the offsets. And so we're in this position where offsets have been proposed because I still can't understand how we got from August 2023 to where we are here, and it really reinforces the need for some clarity. But while the Mayor is correct in that there is no legal grounds, and I'm confident that this will be approved today, just as the applicants are human, just as the submitters are human, the councillors around this table are human as well. And I can't, in good conscience, put my hand up in favour of this because of the removal of those trees. And I know that that puts my colleagues in a position, and I don't like to do that, but I also feel there are other times where I carry my weight with this stuff too. So my problem with the offsets that have been proposed is that between where these trees are going to be removed and the canopy that goes with it, there's 4 lanes of the New England Highway. And I also know a little bit about planting of eucalypts, and I know a little bit about tube stock. And the tube stock councillors are about that big. And to maintain them for 4 years, in a very, 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 very good season, my goodness, you'd be lucky to get to 4 metres. But between that and 4 metres, there's still not very much use for the animals and the habitat that these trees are currently used for. We are going to be losing mature trees. We are going to be losing canopy. To my mind, it's not an adequate solution. It doesn't make good the situation, and there isn't a benefit when it's balanced against what we're losing. And what makes Highfields feel like Highfields is the canopy. It doesn't feel like Springfield, and it doesn't feel like Plainlands because of the vegetation that is there. And when I look at that figure A that we were talking about earlier, I do feel like it wasn't that dense. It's not that densely vegetated. There was a better way here, and I do want better for us. I would have liked us to keep some of those trees and not remove every single one. And so while there is no legal reason to refuse this application today, and while I can hear in the applicant's voice the efforts that have been gone to try to get a good outcome, I just, in good conscience, will not be able to put up my hand to support this and drive past that block in the future and see the removal of those trees. So I ask for my colleagues' understanding, basically. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. A further speaker for the motion. Councillor James.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Brecken. I certainly understand and appreciate the point of view where you're coming from, and I don't think anyone in this room around this table probably doesn't think differently in certain aspects, and I think you hit the nail on the head so well when you said that there is so much common ground here, but then at the same time there's conflict with it. So this is where there's, as the Mayor pointed out before, that really difficult balancing act between growth and livability. So as I said, the same is probably from an emotional point of view. Certainly, you don't want to see the loss of these trees. Certainly, don't. As I said, we don't want to see that. We know the value that they provide. We know who we are as a region, but when we have to make this decision, and this is where I'd hope, and again, I'd echo the Mayor's words. Thank you to Scott McPhee for your words and your work in the community. But I think, and whilst I'm sure everyone around this room certainly respects your point of view, I certainly hope that those who are vehemently against this also can appreciate and respect the point of view of where we sitting around this table have to come from. And the Mayor put it pretty well, to be honest. When you look at everything on balance here, and in terms of, well, think of it from the applicant's point of view. So they're asked under, whether it's local, state or federal, to follow a set of guidelines, a set of rules for something to be approved. They've got to jump through certain hoops to be able to reach a level of approval. They've done all of those. They've done everything that they've been asked of, plus some more. They've done plus more in an attempt to again give back to the community. So I think, put yourself in their position and what they're doing and the role that they've sort of played. And again, as I said, I know I made mention of it before around that conflict potentially around the potential of having park or open space with council as a part of this development. But as I sort of said, that also is a pretty difficult juggling act when you look at that. And I think council's position, or where we certainly have a say on that, is through TRC's open space strategy, which when that comes up for review, there could be something that could be looked at. So I mean, there's things we're learning, I think, as we move forward with this as well. But if a parcel of land is left to council for this particular development, it's the whole entire community, whether they're in Yarraman, whether they're in Ruthven Street, where they are, that'll be paying for the upkeep of that. So again, as I said, I think that's something that has to be considered when you're talking about the business of council. But I think, again, I'm going to paraphrase some of the words that the Mayor said before. But at the end of the day, there is zero reason that we have under local, state or federal legislation, rules, laws, you name it, to be able to be in a position to refuse this. And I think of it of a way of, if you're driving a car and you pull up at the lights and they're green, you have every right and entitlement to drive through. They were orange for a period of time, and that was a period we've been through here, and we've tried to thrash it out and find some common ground to find where we sit. But the light is extreme green at the moment. So the applicant has every right to be able to proceed with this. And I think that's, and again, I'll say the same thing that Councillor Von Hoff said. I'd hope that I said people, whether you're for or against this, have a level of understanding, appreciation, respect of the position that we're in and the decision that we're trying to make, and make what we feel in our own conscience for our own reasons is the decision that we make. And I'm happy to articulate that's why today, whilst, as I said, there's some outcomes here that probably don't completely fit what I'd like to see. At the end of the day, there's a rule book that we have to follow. The applicant has done that every step of the way, and there is no grounds, no reason, no position for us to refuse this today. So that's why I support the motion. Thank you, Chair.
Speaker against, Councillor Bill.
Thanks, Chair. I think most have been said. There's no grounds on planning legislation. However, to quote Councillor Rebecca, we're human beings. And in fact, the only way legislation ever changes is if enough people say, we don't like the current legislation. So I hope there's learnings from today and how we move forward and what's important to our region and the broader community, not small sectors, the broader community. When you see members of your community that you've lived in for 30 years visibly and physically traumatised by a scorched earth approach, that affects you. In fact, the only way change is ever affected is if enough people want to actually see the pendulum swing the other way from time to time, and that the green environment, which is an important part of sustainability. In fact, we can't exist without it. When it is truly put on an equal footing with other parts of infrastructure and how our community grows. I can't humanly support this, and for no other reason, it's not an excuse not to agree. It's not an excuse to agree with legislation all the time, because, well, that's just the way it is. Nothing changes if there's no disagreement. So that's the only reason why I can't support it.
Any speakers for the motion? Further speakers for the motion? Councillor Tim.
I will speak for the motion. Still undecided if I'm going to vote that way, but I really want a chance to share publicly my thoughts right now and say that this is really tough. This is, without a doubt, one of the toughest days I have had in this job. I think I've ever been in this. You're right, there's absolutely no legal reason why you should say no. But there's a hell of a lot of other reasons why you should say no. And I envy the person, if this doesn't get up, trying to find reasons to refuse this, because I don't think any exist. But it's still incredibly tough to do. Thank you.
Councillor Trevor, against?
I'm in a very mixed bag. I'm for it and I'm against it. As previous speakers for the motion have said, it ticks all the boxes. Legally, lawfully, it ticks all the boxes. But then there's what we've described, a human side to it, with trees, and the people out there, the environment, and I do hope that Toowoomba Regional Council has learnt something out of this exercise. For God's sake, we have to learn from this, and we have to go ahead and restructure the way we do things for the betterment of community. I must praise the people who are doing the subdivision. Great block sizes. The street width is great compared to another area that I won't mention. But yeah, very mixed feelings over the whole issue. There's good right and wrong with it too. Thank you.
Any further speakers for? Councillor Gary.
I
like to say, I think council should stop calling in things like this, if you want to know the truth.
Any further speakers against? If not, I'll ask the Mayor to respond.
Thanks very much, Chair. Say a couple of things and we'll close out the debate, I'd suggest. Again, can I commend the presence not only of those that are in the room, but I'm sure are watching online, who have lobbied hard, really hard. Every councillor would have received near on 100 emails from people, Scott, from your crew in regard to this. That's not lost on us, okay? It's not lost on us. However, we have running rails that we're in, and that's where we fall. We have to have good reasons to not approve an application. And some of those have been pointed out today. The legal groundings of those, however, in this instance, just don't measure up. We have an application before us that we have absolutely zero reason to vote against. And I respect everyone's views. Those who wish to vote against it, that's perfectly fine, and it's their choice. That's okay. But at some point, councillors make decisions that aren't always favourable for people. We've made a couple today that I'd imagine there'll be quite a few people that won't be happy with. And I'd imagine we'll get plenty of emails after this one as well. That's the life we live in. This is a 24-hour job for every person that's around this table. And for the applicant, Lynn, you're still there, thank you very much indeed for being here today, but to also articulate the challenges that you've seen by making sure that you provide housing. You've gone to extra lengths. That's not lost on us. I'll guarantee you it's not lost on us. What I seek as a leader of the community, elected by the representatives, elected by the people of the community, is that let's not point fingers. Let's continue this work together. Right? We are on a journey. We're in the middle of the 75th Toowoomba Carnival of Flowers. Our region is known for flowers. Our region is known for a green space. We're in a bit of a bind at the moment because of where we sit. But I'm sure collectively we've got smarts in our community and around this table that can work through that. And there'll be a chance to do that. And it's coming up very soon. There'll be a chance for us to do that as a community. But what we don't want is a community that's divided when we all want the same thing at the end of the day, which is a beautiful place to live. Lynn, you mentioned it. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What's beauty for someone may be quite different for the other. But ultimately, the reasons we choose to live, learn, work and play in this region is because we want to be here. We love it, we enjoy it. That's the balance. I'll go right back to my opening comments. What's been demonstrated today is a challenge for us as a growing community, one of the fastest growing communities in Australia, in fact. The challenge of balancing livability and growth. That's not a new phenomenon. It'll stay with us because we're a desirable place to live. So what I ask the community, irrespective of the outcome here, is that you've got two opposing views, yet the commonality is closer than the divide. And let's never forget that. Let's never forget that as a community. Therefore, I'm happy to move the motion.
No, thank you, Mayor. Before I put the vote, can I thank the officers for what they've done over and above the normal expectations, which is very high at all times, to present this today. Thank you for the applicant and the submitters for their very worthwhile and sincere and thought through submissions and answering the many questions that were asked by councillors today. Thank you to my colleagues, and I feel for those who are very touched by the issues that are at stake. From my point of view, I think our colleague my colleague Bailey, our legal officer, would understand that we look at these issues on the basis of what the P&E court would decide. In my view, there's just no doubt that it would approve this application. So we'll put the matter to a vote. All those in favour of the motion? Six. Against? 4. 4 against. So good. Yeah, the motion has been carried. Thank you. Will we have an adjournment for 5 minutes or not?
We will definitely have an adjournment for 5 minutes, and we'll resume the ordinary meeting of council at 5 past 5. In fact,
before
5 past 5.
Before we do that, I think I've formally closed this meeting.
Definitely.
Thank you.
5 past 5.
Thank you.